I am very happy and honored that we have 3 amazing congressional candidates here. And I've been emailing with them for the past 2 months, and I'm very grateful that they're here. We have Christine Conforti, Stephanie Schmidt, and David Applefield. So I think we had an amazing opportunity to hear from them. So I'm just going to share the rules of this conversation. Each candidate is going to have 10 minutes to introduce themselves to the club. After all of them have spoken with their 10 minutes, we're going to have a question and answer session for as long as our time allows. I do want to, we may be able to do it till like 9 o'clock, but then we have to kind of run out, okay? So Gary and I will be discussing the questions. Rick is going to pick up questions from everybody, and Larry Rosenthal is going to help at a time, so that we make sure everybody is in line. And I'm going to ask Mr. David Applefield to please start. We're going to do it alphabetically.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Martin. Thank you, Council President and Anna Elisa, for organizing this and for allowing us to present ourselves here in Hamilton. I'm David Applefield. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to meet you and to speak together and to be here in Hamilton. They say talk is cheap, but they're wrong. Talk is precious, and talk is dialogue. And we need dialogue a lot more now than ever. Some of us heard the State of the Union and heard things like our families are flourishing, this great economic success, this is a blue-collar boom, it's all working. You wonder, are we in the same place? Talk is dialogue. Conversation is what we really need. I've been walking around the district, been knocking on doors, and I've been hearing kind of a fear, a speechlessness. So the time that we connect, that we become a community, that we work on sharing and sharing ideas has never been more important than now. This is how we listen, we learn, we discover ways to compromise. This is a time when confidence in the nation is low, anxiety is high, and is probably one of the most serious moments in our history as a country. What kind of country do we want to be? What kind of democracy do we want to build? I think the answers start right here in what we're doing, what you're doing, what's happening across the district, across the country. It's in communities, it's in the basements of libraries, it's in community centers, it's in churches, and we need to bring our 43 communities together. We have 2 in Mercer County, the others in Monmouth and Ocean. I believe as Americans, as citizens in New Jersey, there is a lot more that connects us than divides us. I think we need to remember that, regardless of whether we've been here for generations or if we've been here for just a few months. We tend to think that the work of a member of Congress is about voting in Washington, and I think it goes a lot further than that. It's really about being present right here in NJ4, where we live and where we work. Being present. We send our elected representatives to Washington to work for us, to work for our communities, but for years, I don't have to tell you how many years, but I will. 39 years, our district has been deprived of fresh thinking, deprived of creative energy, deprived of new economic opportunities. This has to end. It will end. We can do better, we deserve better, and I think we have the talent, right here to prove it. If I have the honor of being your next congressperson, that's what I see as my first line of responsibility, to restore public faith in public office. It starts here in this room. It's our talent, our imaginations, our belief in ourselves. I want NJ4 to mean something, to be a positive and unifying force, built on local business, built on local talent, and inspired by local leadership and local vision. We each have a voice. Every citizen has a voice. We can have impact. We can change the future. We can shape a better tomorrow with intention and with purpose. We need an elected official in Washington and right here who knows how to listen. I'm a communications professional. I have a 30-year career as a journalist, as a media specialist. I've worked with thought leaders and business leaders and global organizations around the world, worked in 35 countries, and always towards meeting challenges and solving problems. I listen and I find solutions. That's what I do. I fix things. For 20 years, I've worked for the Financial Times newspaper in Europe, throughout Africa, in the Middle East. I've published reports on youth employment, on combating diseases, on alternative energy, conserving water, supporting women entrepreneurs, promoting strategies for impact investing, and exploring new technology and innovation, and a lot more. I'm also a small business owner myself. I'm a family man. I have a publishing house on the other side of the state in Red Bank. I live with my wife, Julia, who's here tonight. Back. Thank you. You gotta be courageous to be married to a candidate. And our really recently adopted black lab, Ramses. I was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I lived in Livingston. I studied at Amherst College. I went to grad school at Northeastern. We have 3 grown kids. Alex works on, he trains social entrepreneurs in poor communities. Anna's a registered nurse in rheumatology and geriatrics. And our bambino, Ernesto, is a professional soccer player in Austria. My mom arrived in 1947 to New Jersey as an 11-year-old child Holocaust survivor. She went on to become a psychiatric social worker, and at 84 today, she continues to give talks in churches and schools and community centers on how to say no to hate. My father was a public school teacher from Union. Both of my parents graduated up the road here from Rutgers, and both have helped shape the person that I am today. To me, the essential issues that demand our attention right now: affordable and accessible health care and medication. No one in America, no one in NJ4 should have to compromise our health or our well-being. No one should have to choose between paying bills, putting food on the table, and filling their prescriptions. Quality education. It starts with paying our teachers what they deserve and providing the resources that they need. From preschool to elementary school to high school to college and beyond, nothing is really more important or a higher priority than investing in our children's future. And lastly, it's not lastly, but it's essential, it's the top 3, is climate. Climate change and the environment. We must absolutely protect our environment for our tourism industry, our agriculture, our shoreline, our lakes, our rivers, and our communities are destroyed. So while we build awareness, we have an opportunity as well in the area of environment to respond in a smart way that will create jobs and bring new companies and startups and benefit from the economic opportunity of this challenge. It all comes down to our plans, our ideas, our new approaches, our enthusiasm for change, along with our ability to solve these urgent issues. So while we generate dialogue and we come back to the issue of sharing and talking and using the local response, the local energy, the local talent, we must usher in a new era of moral leadership. The how, that's what I know how to do. And I'm honored to be here with you tonight, working to earn your vote. We need to replace our incumbent in November, but we also must revitalize the role of our next member of Congress. And together, I'm confident that we can transform our ideas into brilliant results. I thank you, and I welcome all of your questions. As I like to say, if we can fix this, if we talk. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you first and foremost for your time and attention on a Wednesday evening. I want to thank people who are here completely voluntarily as engaged citizens. I then want to thank our club leadership, our elected officials. We've obviously all been sitting in a bunch of different Democratic club meetings at this point, and I have to say what's really notable and heartwarming here is there's such a feeling of horizontal leadership here. I mean, the fact that you have state level assemblymen giving updates, and this is my second meeting, I haven't seen that in other clubs, and I think it probably speaks to why you've had such successes here, because there is a true embodiment of grassroots values, which means you go from being an everyday engaged citizen, neighbor, to stepping up and serving. So my name is Christine Conforti, and I am a candidate for the 4th District. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself. I was born in Homedale, also on the other side of the state. I graduated from Homedale High School. My mother lives, she works in Red Bank for over 10 years. We have family in a number of towns, from Manalapan to Howell to Fairhaven to Spring Lake to Ocean Township to Neptune Township. So being a big Italian family on both sides, we really do have first and second cousins that we are very close with. And lastly, my grandmother, Louise Ferreira, who's sitting here in the front room, has lived in Hamilton. Thank you. Yes. I wouldn't be here for she's lived in Hamilton for over 20 years, so I've had a really interesting, authentic connection to the township as a result of just coming and visiting my grandmother and spending time here. And I start there because for me, and similar to David, I do really believe ultimately that we should be thinking globally but acting locally. And for me as a citizen, local connections and authentic connections to the places that we're serving is really important. So I just start there to share that I am very much born and raised, homegrown here in the 4th District. And do I know every town like the back of my hand? No. Do I know Monmouth County pretty well? I do. Do I have a good idea of what goes on in Hamilton through the eyes of my grandmother? I do, and I'm really excited for really a permission slip to dig in and learn even more. So when I graduated from Homedale, I went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and I earned a foreign service degree from the School of Foreign Service. As a result of that work and then subsequent travel, I learned to speak Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. Thank you. I love learning Italian, yeah. In Homedale High School, that was one of the options. It was Chinese, German was an option, and then Italian. So I started learning that in 7th grade. So after I graduated from Georgetown University, which if anyone knows is a Jesuit university, and it had a really strong social justice thread through the education. And so I was really drawn to social justice work. So rather than going off and working for one of the big consulting firms, which many of my colleagues did, and I totally respect them for that choice, I was really drawn to the AmeriCorps program. So I served our country through what is, you could think of as the internal Peace Corps. I was a middle school math teacher in a Title I school in Miami, Florida, in a city called Liberty City. It was predominantly a community of color. Most of my students were African American. About 10% were also Latinx. And I share that to say I know two things from a really close personal experience. One is the education system and most of the ways that it's failing, not only our poorer communities, but almost every community, just in the way that it's turned into this test-taking type of operation. And I see that even now today, because what I've been continuing to do in education since 2012 is I go and I train teachers on a social and emotional learning curriculum with the Goldie Hawn Foundation and a program called Mind Up. So I still see this every day. Right now I'm working in schools in Pennsylvania and Boston and Kansas City. So I got a really close eye into what I think is the most precious, important career, and how our teachers are really undervalued and overworked, as are nurses and many other caretaking type of positions. But I also saw firsthand, and this is why this is a really significant part of my story, growing up in Homedale, it's not a diverse community at all. And I think it's very difficult for one being born into a community of privilege to really understand how race plays a role and how socioeconomic status plays a role in your experience in being an American. So I really saw what I do believe is a racist educational funding process, which is that we tie education funding to our property taxes. And I saw firsthand that there's a number of things that affect learning. You know, if I had a student that came in and didn't sleep well the night before because they don't necessarily have a secure home situation, or they didn't have access to a healthy breakfast, that matters. So even if Teach for America thought, so long as you put a big leader in front of this classroom, those kids can learn, there's so many other integrated things related to health and affordable housing and just overall safety. So I completed that 2-year commitment, and I went on then to get back to more international type work, and I found myself in the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative called the United Nations Global Compact. So I worked in the UN in New York, actually 1 year in New York, 1 year in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and I was a project manager. I worked under the chief of staff, and we worked on writing handbooks. I organized conferences in Geneva and Ethiopia and Sao Paulo, and I also built online platforms, and the goal was to facilitate public-private partnerships between some of the biggest multinational corporations ever, like Coca-Cola, Merck, Monsanto. You think of the big ones that are not always the best actors. We were doing our best to have them in a non-mandatory way subscribe and set goals towards labor principles, towards environmental sustainability principles, towards respecting human rights, and towards fighting against corruption. And while I learned a ton, I traveled the world. I learned a lot professionally from being an international organization. I learned how to work cross-culturally. I ultimately didn't feel like what we're doing every day was having an impact. So in 2014, I had a bit of a soul-searching, I refer to it as my quarter-life crisis, and I started to question a lot of what I was doing and why I was there. I personally did not enjoy working in New York. I really craved getting back to a smaller town type of feel. I grew up going to Long Beach Island in the summers, and I'm just more of a water, beach town kind of girl. And so I decided that I wanted to see how far my passion and my perseverance and my hard work would take me if I were to apply it to an idea that I personally controlled and I personally was invested in. And so I decided to take a leap in entrepreneurship. I scared the heck out of my father, because who quits the United Nations? Thank you. But I left, and I honestly have never looked back, because I have always been driven by having a positive impact and feeling a sense of meaning in my work. And I really have an inability of doing things I don't believe in. And I really do think that's something my grandmother can attest to. And so over the past 5 years, entrepreneurship has taken me to starting a private coaching practice. So today, I work with clients mostly in one-on-one scenarios from 3 months to 3 years. And I help them go through a similar process and ask things like, what's my purpose? What kind of work gives me joy? What kind of impact do I want to have on the world? So some of my clients end up leaving more of an organizational structure to start their own small business. Some of them just find more meaning and clarity on the kind of impact they want to have in their organization. And so that work is really the work of learning how to build relationships, learning how to think creatively and collaboratively. It's really a process of helping someone get out of black and white thinking and look for the gray area. And quite honestly, as proud as I am for my United Nations experience and my Georgetown University degree, it is the coaching skill that I personally think we need most in Congress, because it is the ability and the practice of listening and really looking for the common humanity in the person in front of you, and asking questions that help someone see their own internal limitations to seeing why something else might be possible. So I really do believe in every public issue, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of them tonight, there's always a gray area. There's always a solution that's not black or white. And I think it really benefits us on every level to start thinking and asking those types of questions. So rather than it being both and us versus them, you know, what solution that is usually simple and obvious have we not thought of? And the last thing I'll say there is, I think we often think of things, and I'm very proud to be standing in front of a very democratic group. But I get concerned nationally when I see so much conversation or lack of conversation in such an us versus them, red versus blue dichotomy. And as I speak to older generations and learn it wasn't always that way, I personally think, and actually at a house party this weekend in Middletown, a gentleman in the room had said, you know, the thing is, it's not right versus left, red versus blue. It's really top versus bottom. And so for me, one of the most important values and experiences to have at this moment in time for fighting for our health and fighting for environmental sustainability is, sorry, I just lost my thought for a second. I'm looking at the time. It is corporate responsibility. Thank you. It is the ability to look at that top and say, how did they make all that money? They didn't do it in a fair way in which the externalities on people's health and our environment was taken into an account. And so I think one of the key things we need to do is write legislation and put a price on the polluters and the negative aspects of business of those multinational corporations, and then take all that money and put subsidies into local sustainable business. I see that. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking about more things.
Hi folks, it's such a pleasure to be back in Hamilton. I had the honor of being here the day after election night and enjoying the great celebration for Mayor Martin's election and the sweep of the council and the enthusiasm that was in that room that night. I know that we can carry with us to 2020. I firmly believe that the path to victory in CD4 goes through Hamilton, it goes through Mercer County, and the organizing efforts and the ground game that were put together this fall and the spring lead up were just incredible to watch, and I know a lot of people in this room played such an integral part. So thank you for all the work that you did to elect such great local and state leaders, and on behalf of all the candidates of CD4, even though we just have 2 towns in Mercer County, they are the core of what this district is and the core of what a Democratic path to victory and a defeat of Chris Smith looks like this fall, less than 9 months away. So my name is Stephanie Schmid. I am running for Congress because I've spent my entire life as a human rights advocate, as an attorney, as a foreign service officer, as a nonprofit leader, and I believe our country is at a crisis point. I have had the great privilege of living overseas in democracies that were tinkering on the brink, countries where elections slid, countries where presidents were impeached, and I have seen the great harm that that does to the democratic foundation. So I am running for office in part because I believe we need leaders to step up who have significant experience working in the federal government, working across the table, writing legislation in Congress, and bring their leadership to Washington with a bit of a generational change. So I split the difference here between David and Christine. Christine in her early 30s, I'm about to turn 40. David's in his 60s. I think we all have some great ideas that are special in our perspective based on where we are in our lives. And I'm so honored to be here talking with you. So I've known our Congressman, Chris Smith, for over 23 years now. I got my start in international human rights and foreign policy work, doing a summer fellowship program, a nonpartisan program in Washington, D.C., when I was 17 years old in the summer of 1997. And this Jersey girl got assigned to that Jersey guy's office, and that's where the similarities end. I have known for a long time that we agree on very little. Other than that service to our country is of absolute essence. But the reason I am a human rights advocate and the reason I am running against Smith is because I believe that we don't get to pick and choose whose human rights are valued, whose rights are taken into account, and the congressman has made a career of segmenting and separating out folks and saying your rights are worthy and your rights are not. You deserve to marry who you want to marry, you do not. You can adopt children, you cannot. Women, I'm sorry, if you need reproductive health care, you're gonna have to go somewhere else. And that's not a world that I wanna live in. So after that summer, I went off and majored in political science and international human rights at Yale University. I then went on to law school at the University of California, Berkeley, where I continued work that I've been doing since I was a teenager, fighting against violence against women, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and then also beginning to do immigration, asylum, and refugee work. I've seen our immigration system up close and personal for a number of years, as an advocate, as an attorney, and also as a US government official tasked with making decisions about who should be allowed to come into our country through our visa system and process. And I'm deeply interested in going to Washington and doing the critical work that has been lacking for decades of comprehensive reform to our entire system. I practiced law for about 7 years. I was a law clerk on the Southern District of New York in Manhattan, out on the Ninth Circuit in Seattle. I liked to move around a lot in my 20s. And then I settled down and did private practice for about 4 years, long enough to figure out that I didn't want to represent corporations. I wanted to represent the American people. So in 2011, I swore an oath to protect and defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think about that oath every day and where it's led me. And I joined the United States Foreign Service as a political officer. I deployed to Port-au-Prince, Haiti for over 2 years after the devastating hurricanes and earthquakes there. My job in Haiti was to work with political parties, local elected officials, the parliament, and their electoral commission to help them hold free and fair elections that have been delayed for over 2 years, to pass rule of law reform at a national level, and to work to diversify their, I don't know if this is working anymore. Yeah, okay. Their legislative bodies by electing more women to parliament. And that was the work that I specialized in at the State Department and did in other places, including Brazil, in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor with then Assistant Secretary, now Congressman to the North, Tom Malinowski. And it was a great privilege to do this work of helping other countries strengthen their democratic foundations and become mirrors of some of the best aspects of America, the reason I wanted to serve, the values I wanted to portray overseas. And if you'd asked me in October of 2016 what I would do with the rest of my life, well, that was an easy answer. It was continue to be a US diplomat. It's the greatest job in the world. Until your own electoral process happens and it is neither free nor fair. And you are deeply concerned about the state of your democracy, and it feels rather disingenuous to get up and go to work every day and tell other countries how to do this. So I had a personal crisis of faith in the fall of 2016, but I am not a quitter, and I wanted to see what this administration was going to be like. I didn't want to give up my dream job serving my country and run away without knowing what this administration's priorities were. So I took this job in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor instead of going, over to, say, Mauritania to hide out for a couple of years, so I could see what the Trump administration was going to do. And what I saw was extremely troubling. A lot of it has come out in the impeachment hearings. I watched senior leaders of color, women, our first LGBTQ rights envoy be pushed out of their jobs, forced into early retirement. their expertise be completely ignored. I watched the Secretary's Office on Global Women's Issues, which helped female entrepreneurs get critical funding, including through corporate and government partnerships like Goldman Sachs working with the State Department in Haiti, be closed down for no reason. And then in the spring of 2018, massive sections of our annual human rights reports, the reports I wrote and edited, the reports I used when I was a young lawyer arguing on behalf of asylum claimants, were deleted with a push of the button on the orders of Vice President Pence. And those are reports that had to do with reproductive health care access, the struggle for marriage equality, the violence against women in Central and South America that is still causing families to flee to our border despite the horrific circumstances there. And I knew that if I was going to continue to call myself a human rights advocate, I had to resign and speak out. So I left the center in the spring of left the State Department in the spring of 2018 and went to the Center for Reproductive Rights, where until I launched my run for Congress this summer, I led the US foreign policy program, fighting against these attacks on reproductive rights, fighting against the global gag rule, and fighting against my old friend, Congressman Chris Smith, who is the chief proponent of most of these policies on Capitol Hill. I wrote a bill called the Reproductive Rights or Human Rights Act, which is now led and co-sponsored by over 100 members in the House and the Senate, including most of the New Jersey delegation. I led a 100-member coalition on Capitol Hill with the American Federation of Teachers, the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, to get that bill introduced last spring. And I have been in hand-to-hand combat with this administration and our congressmen, suing them multiple times in order to get information about what is going on in our name. And so I am here running for Congress because I believe it is time, after 39 years, that somebody gave Chris Smith a run for his money. I think I'm the right person at the right time. I know him. He doesn't want to run against me. He's running scared already. You can just look at those newsletters that you've seen an uptick in your mailbox, right? Those started coming on a monthly basis instead of a quarterly basis after I reported my September fundraising numbers and almost outraised him in the third quarter in 25 days. Together, we can flip this seat in 2020 and unite the New Jersey delegation, and it would be my great honor and privilege to be your candidate and work with you to do that. Thank you. We're going to do this. We're going to ask you guys questions.
I never asked questions.
Sure. Delighted.
I will ask you the question after.
Fine. Delighted. 2 minutes. Three-part question. This is like Hollywood Squares.
Are there industries in
We hear the question. Anna, with the
The question is,
Alright, let me
you
just
asked the
say,
question.
we asked for another microphone and the library's microphone actually broke right before the meeting. So I'm going to tell them the question or ask them the questions and they'll repeat it for everybody to hear, okay? Okay, or I will borrow the microphone. All right, so this is a three-part question. Are there industries in need of more regulation? Will you accept corporate contributions? And are corporations people?
Okay, excellent. 2 minutes. It's I'm ready. First thing, regulation. I have to talk about health. I actually carry this as my little prop in my pocket. This is my drops for my glaucoma in this eye. Right, $15 is the cost of this drug. These drops in every other developed country on earth. $192 here, or $144 if you have Medicare. I have researched and come up with a plan for a district-wide solution to bridge the healthcare cost. We do need to regulate. We also have 660,000 television ads for prescription drugs and with a budget of $29.5 billion, right? With Humira, one drug, spending $3.5 billion. The media and the media companies and agencies cashing in 15% on that. We have enough money to have other types of solutions. I would introduce legislation quickly that would regulate the amount of money that has to be contributed to local funds to bridge the healthcare gap and bring the cost of prescription drugs down. I've been bringing together all the partners. I've been talking and consulting with health professionals, insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm going to bring everybody together, and we are going to come up with an NJ4 health fund regulated in an open way to bridge that gap. That's the first of many industries that I would work on in both a regulatory manner and a moral and with a moral solution as well. Thank you.
Okay, I want to say one note on just Chris Smith. So this is an area where I think we need to think deeper and bigger. And it might sound impossible, but here's where the gray area is, and that impossible possibility. What if Chris Smith doesn't run? There's so much chaos going on nationally. What if he doesn't run? What is our message then? What is a message that's worth our time and our money if Chris Smith is not the opponent and it is actually somebody else? So I just think that's something that we should all deeply think about, so that this is not just an anti-one man, one person. We stand for things way more than that. And there are people potentially in this room and definitely in this town and definitely in the district who feel attacked when we go right at Chris Smith. We're basically questioning their judgment, and it can be taken as just not a way to really build a bridge. So I just want to say one point about that. No, I'm not accepting corporate PAC money or fossil fuel money. I want to make a note that even candidates who say that they're not accepting that, but if they accept DCCC money, the DCCC accepts a lot of corporate PAC and fossil fuel money. So that's another place where I think we need to look even deeper. The things that I think absolutely need regulation, and I'll tell you a really quick healthcare story. My mom was diagnosed with cancer at the end of October, so I've been on the deep inside of understanding all the things that create a 50% cancer rate for Americans. And it's absolutely, we need to regulate the pharmaceutical companies, we need to regulate chemical companies, we need to regulate the agribusiness companies that allow so many different additives and hormones that all adds up to making us sick at these incredibly high rates. Not only is medicine more available, I've lived in Europe, it's so much more accessible and available, but the rates of disease are significantly lower. We pay the most for healthcare for the least true health outcomes. And then finally, corporations are not people, and actually I believe the sum is bigger than the parts, right? I don't think that corporations are rational. That is why we need government regulation, and we need to stop subsidizing polluters that are exploiting our health and exploiting the environment, and we need to subsidize things that are cleaning up our health and cleaning up our environment. Thank you.
I think this is an awesome question to start with because it gets to the heart of so many issues. So I agree, corporations are not people. I think that Citizens United was the worst Supreme Court decision since Dred Scott, which said that African Americans were not full people for the purposes of counting citizenship. And the flow of money that has gone into our system since that decision said corporations have a right to free speech is absolutely at the heart of so many of the problems we have today. I am not accepting a dime of corporate PAC money or fossil fuel money, but I believe my candidacy is a wonderful illustration of the fact that you can still raise the amount of money you need to win in the system as it currently is, while still holding true to those principles and only being accountable to your constituents. But if I have the privilege of representing you in Washington, absolutely one of my top priorities is campaign finance reform, because nobody benefits from a system where your elected representatives spend more time on the phone with donors than they do listening to folks in town halls. And I absolutely want you to know that that is at the core of my belief and value system. With regard to regulation, I agree that prescription drug prices and regulation of drug companies is an absolutely essential step. The House has already passed a bill that would allow the federal government through Medicaid to directly negotiate the price of prescription drugs for everybody. I support that, as well as the Medicare for America Act, which would also do that, enroll everybody in Medicare who is not yet enrolled in health insurance or does not have sufficient coverage, but preserves private employer insurance and the option of choice for those who want it. I believe that is the way forward for the most number of Americans. And then I'll just say clean water, clean air, and all the environmental regulations that have been rolled back by this administration by using the Environmental Protection Agency as a method of destruction rather than protection. It is absolutely essential that on day one, we put everything back into place and then move forward into a cleaner, brighter future.
Oh, yes.
This is a question on immigration. What would you propose as a way to deal with illegal immigration?
So behind every policy is people, so I just want to give a quick connection story to immigration. My first boyfriend was actually an immigrant from Brazil, and he had his visa denied twice to come back to the country for no reasonable known reason. To this day, he can't come back. My current partner is an immigrant from Germany. I'm a third generation from immigrants from Italy. And I've lived a immigrant-like experience in Costa Rica, in Spain, in Brazil, in Italy, and in Germany. All these different places that I've lived, both during my time at the United Nations and then during the past 5 years as in my work as an entrepreneur. And my roommate is actually an immigrant from Haiti. So I see the immigrant experience, I've lived around it. I do believe we should abolish ICE, and I do believe we should decriminalize the border. I think we need to recognize that most people trying to come through in that way are refugees in some way, and that they are here because they are in crisis. And I think we need to reconnect with our commitment to human rights and our values of humanity first. So those are two clear things. I do also support putting a pause on deportation until we fully audit the system, so that it's a free and fair and transparent process. And one quick point there is, if we get to environment, I do support a national scale program like the Green New Deal, and I think a really smart way to create that updated immigration policy is to look at the type of labor that we need to have a massive infrastructure upgrade and completely transition to a renewable economy, and then reorganize our immigration visas and quotas and all that around the type of sustainable economy we are very proactively moving towards.
So as I alluded to in my opening statement, I've thought long and hard about this and been on many different sides of this issue as an attorney defending folks who are being deported, as an adjudicator of visas. So here, I think the Obama administration got a lot of this right. We have a limited amount of resources federally to engage in roundups and deportations, and they should be used for serious criminal offenses. Most of the folks who are in this country illegally did not come here illegally. They overstayed visas or they failed to adjust their status. And I think it's a poor use of our limited resources to be rounding up those sorts of folks. I do support a pathway to citizenship for our dreamers, our DACA recipients. I don't think anybody should be punished for the actions of their parents. I understand very deeply the violence and the despair that causes people to flee to our borders. So I think the best thing that we can do is actually more fully fund our immigration system, our adjudicators, our judges, our officers at the borders, because if we actually allow them to accept claims in an orderly manner and process them and have the resources to do so, we can assure that folks who do meet the legal requirements for asylum or refugee status can come in, that folks who are using it for a different purpose are not allowed in, and that we trust in our Foreign Service and Immigration and Customs officials who work very hard around the clock and around the world to protect us and make us safe. Because the reality is that 18 of the 19 9/11 hijackers were in this country legally under our prior immigration systems rules. So we need to be very careful about the changes we make and always have our national security at heart as well.
I think we need a total rethink on immigration. I think it's a cultural issue. It's we have the subject has been imbibed with fear that's coming from the lack of leadership and the type of leadership of ruling with fear in the country coming from the Trump administration. We forgot that our soul, our heart, our economy, our sense of being, who we are, what we believe in, is rooted to our story of immigration. I know when my mother came and my great grandfather came, did he have papers? No, but he fought his way through. He worked his way up, and he became part of this success story. We need to really stop turning against or let ourselves be turned against our own neighbors. And that will succeed if we rethink the entire policy issue and we talk about this differently. It breaks my heart when I see that fear when I'm going door to door across, the fear when it's a Latin American name and you see that there's caution about opening the door, or you're driving along Route 35 and they have the ICE officials who have dragnets out. That's not the country that we signed up to be. That isn't who we are. The last thing I want to say, I believe also in a pathway to citizenship, and I think that our State Department, we really need to initialize the function of State Department and use our Peace Corps in a different way, especially in Latin America, and help reinforce economies and education systems so a lot less people feel as if they need to or should make that treacherous walk to our borders. Our own son, Alex, worked in the north of Guatemala and has given us many stories of people who've made that journey, get arrested, get expelled, and come back. And there's something wrong with the entire way in which we see immigration, and we need to talk about it. We need a national discussion in a different way.
Next question. How do you feel about the Second Amendment and what would you do about it as it stands?
All right, so I'll flip that one around a little bit and say, how do I feel about gun control? Because I think this is an area where all three of us actually agree a lot, that there is so much to be done in the middle and the false equivalency of the extremes, that we're either taking away people's Second Amendment rights and their guns, or we're doing nothing. And I think that is absolutely the wrong way to approach this. I believe in common sense gun control reforms, starting with a reinstatement of the assault weapons ban, a banning of the ability to purchase magazines and other automatic weapons and rifles online, closing all the gun show and other background check loopholes to make sure we have universal background checks, integrating the ability of law enforcement at the local, state, and national level for those systems to communicate and that information to be shared. passing red flag laws that allow family members to share concern about a loved one who may be in a crisis situation and prevent harm without unduly involving law enforcement and possibly causing their loved one to be arrested. We need to destigmatize access to mental health care and resources to make sure that people can get the help that they need when they're in crisis. But fundamentally, we need to protect our children and our neighbors from being violently gunned down in churches and in schools. And I just believe that those human rights, the right to go to school free from violence and fear, far outweigh the rights of somebody to use an assault weapon to go hunting with. Quite honestly, if you need that to hunt, you probably need to take some lessons at the gun range.
Okay. Yeah, well, we cannot confuse Second Amendment, and that is with assault weapons and warlike guns. It's just they need to be assault weapons need to be regulated, need to be banned. It's not a matter of self-defense, either for protecting ourselves and our families or protecting us against the tyranny of government. The second point I wanted to say about this is I believe we need to have a national registry. We need to close the loopholes, of course, and the ability to purchase guns in gun shows. A national registry, though, would help, and a national database, maybe a blockchain database that cannot be altered. So that and somebody is actually working now on the idea of gun insurance. I think we also need to be able to, insurance, to be insured to own guns. Then there is also the issue of how to hold responsible firearm manufacturers when the products are used irresponsibly, violently, and causing absolute horrors and death. The last thing I want to say is we need to be thinking, how do we structure the programs in our schools? Because as we teach kids and we teach school educators how to protect themselves and we keep our establishments safer, we're creating levels of trauma with our children that are creating other health factors that are going to last forever. So this whole issue and the has to be, again, that's why I say it's really about national discussion and better ideas. But we need to put our foot down once and for all, take this seriously, that firearms have to be regulated and our relationship to guns has to change.
So I feel really strongly that language is important. So beyond even gun rights, I think we should be talking about gun safety. And unfortunately, this is another policy issue in which I have a personal story. So I talked about the community that I served in Miami, Florida. And I keep in touch with two of my students, one named Keenan and one in Ronaldo. And about a year after I finished teaching, I got a call that my other student, Sebastian, was killed by a stray bullet. And so I worked in a school where there were metal detectors. I worked in a school where there were other gunshots very frequently. And so I saw firsthand in many communities, this isn't just the tragedies that we see happening, honestly, in wealthier communities that are equally awful, but it's a threat of violence and a threat of walking to school safely or walking home every single day. So I agree with all the common sense gun laws that Stephanie talked about, but I would take it a step further. I'd like to think about cars and the way that we license cars, which in and itself is a massive weapon if you think about it. So I really like Andrew Yang's proposal for a 5-year licensing system that would be regulated by federal agents. So in order to have a license for a gun, you would have to sit and interview with a federal agent. And you would have to renew it every 5 years. I mean, think about what it takes to get a license for a car. Why would we not do something even more stringent for operating a gun and owning a gun? The second, beyond just destigmatizing mental health, I think we need to fund mental health programs, and that starts in schools. A lot of the violence that I believe we're really concerned about when it comes to guns, when we speak nationally, it is the violence that's happening in schools, right? We have these awful tragedies. The work that I mentioned earlier, that is a mindfulness-based, neuroscience-based program with the Goldie Hawn Foundation, is a social and emotional learning program, and what it does is significantly decreases anxiety, depression. It increases a child's ability to have empathy for others. It decreases bullying. It completely transformed children's mental health and positive school culture. And so I think proactively, nationally, in a federally funded way, we need to invest in the way that we're teaching kids skills to manage their emotions and to cultivate positive mental health.
Okay, our next question here. How do you plan on protecting LGBTQIA+ rights?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, and the thing that I want to accentuate most is is to think about the stress and the anxiety and the mental health issues that this community has been is subjected to, because that's something that gets ignored. You know, I was in during the beginning of parade month. I was in Newark Airport, and there were the rainbows on the ground, and I was watching the passengers come off the off planes, and I realized as people were being greeted, and there was music and dance, and there was a bit of celebration, I realized that that how much can be learned in the LGBTQ community about, not only about choice of who we love, but also about freedom of expression, freedom of identity. I think, again, we need a different kind of discussion in our families, in our schools, in our communities about freedom of expression, freedom of identity. We need to protect, of course, legally. We need to reinforce laws, but we have them, and we have to absolutely. We have to go farther. We need more dialogue. We need to stop judging. I really think that's really the key to almost everything that we handle in our society.
Working in the reproductive rights and justice community, I've had the great privilege of working closely with LGBTQ allies, because we understand that those rights, both constitutionally and foundationally in the United States, and more broadly in our civil rights movement and history, are inextricably linked. When we talk about the threat to Roe v. Wade, it's not just abortion that's at stake. It's an entire doctrine and theory of civil rights law and evolution that grounds your right to exist and live and love and pursue your life under personal liberty, which I just think is absolutely essential to the American dream. And I'm blessed to call so many folks friends in the LGBTQ plus community, and it pains me deeply to see how fearful they are in this administration of their rights and relationships being attacked and stripped away. And when somebody asked me during the vetting committee interview that we had for the CD4 candidates in Monmouth where I thought we were at, I said, well, I think about the Loving versus Virginia decision, which legalized interracial marriage in the 1950s. And think, 60, was it 60? And Brown versus Board of Ed was prior. Think how far we have come and how hard we have had to fight, and how unfinished the civil rights work for racial justice in this country is. And we just legalized same-sex marriage in 2014. So we have a lot of way to go, and I think it starts just by putting our faith in others, focusing on our common humanity. It's why I take a human rights approach to so many issues. And it also starts with defeating a congressperson whose views are straight from 1950. It is embarrassing to me that we are represented by somebody who thinks it's okay to say out loud that children would be better in orphanages than adopted into LGBTQ families. That's not the world I live in, nor one I want to fight for.
Thank you. So I appreciate that reality check on where the conversation really started, not too long ago on these rights. I am privileged. I currently live in Ocean Grove, which is right on the border of Asbury Park, which has a beautiful, vibrant LGBTQ community, and the Monmouth County LGBTQ caucus meets down the street from where I live. So I've had the privilege of sitting in on many of their meetings and ask them, like, in your own words, what are the biggest challenges that happen in your life? And they shared quite a few, including mental health, obviously the threats of bullying. They included the access to adequate healthcare, that healthcare professionals are not properly trained in LGBTQ issues. And then they mentioned elderly care, that there's a huge population of older LGBTQ citizens who go into elder care homes and suddenly have to revert in the way that they're openly expressing themselves, and sometimes even from a gender perspective need to not be fully who they identify as. So legislatively, I think we need to do a couple things. We need to pass the Equality Act to prohibit discrimination in the workplace. I think we need to pass the Every Child Deserves a Family Act. I totally agree with what Stephanie just said. I think we need to federally ban the Panic Defense Bill. So two things were huge steps forward in New Jersey. First, the Panic Defense Bill ban, meaning that you can't say that your violence was because it was in self-defense towards an LGBTQ person. And they also passed a pilot program for inclusive curriculum. So this is another issue where it gets back and starts with people, and I think it starts with education. And I'm gonna go back to mindfulness because it literally is neurologically fact of how the brain works. But when you practice these techniques of slowing down and breathing, and they're really simple, it literally simultaneously builds empathy. When you have empathy for someone who's not like you, just the ability to feel what someone else is feeling, it simultaneously is decreasing bullying. So I would want to put into Common Core standards at the federal level LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, as well as social and emotional learning curriculum.
I think this one's for Stephanie. What policy would you implement to address the rising costs of healthcare, and do you support Affordable Care Act or single care?
So I talked a little bit about this earlier in the bill that I support, which is called the Medicare for America Act, and it is led by Rosa DeLauro and Jan Schakowsky in the House. And I know that this bill has the votes to pass in the next Congress if we can flip the Senate and elect a president who's willing to sign it into law. And I'm very focused in my mind as a legislature about what we can do immediately to help real people. Because I think part of the problem on the left is we get involved in a vicious debate about what the perfect and ideal policy is, and years go by and actual people die while we are aiming for the perfect and not passing the good immediately and then working. So what I like about this bill, as I said, it immediately enrolls automatically anybody in Medicare who does not have health insurance or who is underinsured or chooses to opt in. It preserves private employer-based insurance for anyone who wants it, and it allows that flexibility, which I think is critical for younger generations of folks who are not in, a 20-year job with guaranteed health insurance to go back and forth. And I myself have experienced that several times alone in the past few years, needing to make that choice about buying a plan on the public market or going uninsured for a month. And because I have a pre-existing condition, I haven't had the luxury actually of making that choice. I always have to buy, and it's incredibly expensive to do that. So I think that one of the great things about this bill is that it empowers the federal government to negotiate directly with drug companies the price of all drugs to the benefit of all of us in both the public and the private system. This is the transition point forward in a national conversation about single payer versus private insurance that has been going on my entire life. I think we as a party and folks who care about healthcare need to do the work to help educate folks on what a single payer system would look like. And administratively, this allows the federal government to start that work and figure it out before any sort of wholesale transition is made.
That's good, but it's not gonna work, and this is why. I totally believe in HR 3. It's already been passed, but it's going to be railroaded because there's another act that's on the floor that's called HR 19, the Lower Cost More Cures Act, which is actually a trap, and it's called a bipartisan common sense solution, which is supported by Chris Smith. It's the television ads that you see are launched by the American Action Network, which is a lobby that contributes to the Congressional Leadership Fund, which is a PAC, which brings us back to the same issue. This is a stacked deck. I will support anything that will advance, universal health care with choice, because we don't want to alienate, and we want to succeed, and we need to move forward. But until we reveal and openly, and that's why as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, we need to reveal, we need greater transparency, and we need to get to the bottom of the lobbying that is absolutely going to sabotage everything that is designed to bring the price of healthcare down. Even there's a movement called Stop HR 3. Who's launching it? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which makes it arguments against the lower drug costs act now. And so we need much more transparency. We need public. We need a lot more articles. We need television programs, and we need to actually respond to our insurance companies and saying enough is enough. This is something that we cannot tolerate. We need real legislation that has teeth in it and is absolutely going to be much more stronger, bolder, and resolute in breaking up what is becoming absolutely intolerable as our country gets sicker and sicker.
Can I just say one quick point of rebuttal? Just to be clear, I don't like when people throw out bill numbers just because it's confusing, but I was not talking about either of the bills David was. That's not, Medicare for America Act is not HR 3 or HR whatever, so I just wanted to clarify that point of possible confusion.
I know what HR 3 is. We don't need to go into it. We understand the positions.
So this is one where I am philosophically different and opposed to both of my colleagues here. It's also a very emotional topic for me. My whole message is about health and sustainability. So first and foremost, so philosophically, I do believe in fundamental change, and I believe it's possible, and I believe it's ethically necessary and urgent today. Secondly, so I support Medicare for all for two really clear reasons. I support it because I don't think healthcare should be a for-profit industry, as I don't think education should be a for-profit industry. So if that's the root cause of all our problems of enormous prescription drug costs for a fraction of our health results, for the opioid crisis, for a rise in children's chronic illness from 12% to 54% in the past 10 years, and a lot of unknown things leading to why there's so much autoimmune disease and why there's so many neurological disorders. The root cause is a for-profit pharmaceutical and insurance system. Insurance doesn't make sense to me when we can have a single payer system that gives us better quality health care and gives us better access to more choice of the doctors that we want. So I think it's all of our jobs here to be educators of what the policy proposals actually are. It will actually make everyone's healthcare in this room better. I don't think you should be paying 20% in the current Medicare system. And I think it should be covering, Medicare for all type programs should be covering comprehensively vision, dental, mental health. And so for two clear reasons, I support the specific Medicare for All Act written by Senator Sanders. One, it gives us economic freedom. You go to other developed countries, your job is not tied to your benefits, to your access to health care. I think it would be a boost in local business and entrepreneurship, and I am absolutely a pro small business person because I'm a business person myself. Second, it includes integrated health care. My mother right now is paying $10,000 out of pocket for supplements and nutrition counseling and a thing called mistletoe therapy that is part of the standard of care in Germany. $10,000 on top of the $10,000 for her her deductible on chemotherapy. That should be available for everyone, and it should be part of the menu to actually promote health. I'm sorry. Thank you.
We said we should ask for 5 minutes. So it's just for healthcare. We all feel so strong. We'll go back to the
Okay, so this question here, how will you gain the Orthodox vote in Lakewood or make inroads in the gated communities in Monmouth County?
So my approach is to sit down and make relationships. So I've already been putting out my feelers of who can give me an introduction to the Orthodox faith leaders. So I would start by trying to take as many meetings as possible. I already have some beginning supporters in Lakewood particularly. I met with the former mayor of Lakewood yesterday who gave a lot of helpful, and I'm sure she would give it to every other candidate on this stage, just helpful people to start to get to know. Can you say the second part of the question?
Or inroads in the gated communities in Monmouth County.
And gated meaning senior communities?
Doesn't specifically.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it starts by going door to door and starting to make relationships. One of the other meetings I had today was in a gated community in Manchester. And there's a really fired up older woman there, and I heard her health story. Actually, her daughter has been disabled because of MS, and so my approach is to empower leaders. That's what I do as a coach. It's less about, and that's why I started talking about this horizontal approach. So I would strategically find people who are already part of that community and empower them to be essentially surrogates of the campaign, and in their own authentic way make relationships or really build on the relationships with everyone that they come in contact with. And that's really my grassroots organizing strategy, is exactly that, is to build this massive people-powered campaign that has emphasis more on people than money. I think money is just a tool to buy votes, but with people, you create votes through conversation. So, I mean, that's sort of a more general answer, but that's specifically how I would look to make relationships in Lakewood as well in the gated communities.
Well, it's a very complex and interesting question. I've been to Lakewood. I sat down with members of the leadership of that community. I explained my own personal past, my mother being a child Holocaust survivor. I talked about my own family origin, and they said, you seem like a nice guy, why don't you pick another district? Because we like the guy we have, you know. So it's an interesting question of values, of relationships, and my point here is this. Communities that are misunderstood or closed, that require and demand and need for their own safety and their own endurance, tolerance, need to also understand that tolerance works in every direction. So if we can help, create opportunities for people to sit down and talk to each other, preferably eat and drink together, if it's kosher. We have a possibility of understanding that it's difficult, but it takes an effort. There are shared values. We also understand that there is alienation, there is fear in the other communities around Lakewood about property acquisitions and etc. The only way to move forward on this is to sit down, I think, through probably the leader of the yeshiva, an institution of higher learning, and say, we need greater community interaction. And just to speak to the point of gated communities, anything gated not only protects you, but it also insulates you. So we need ways in which we create community events, that we change okay? We exchange, we do different things together, and we find that there are commonalities among all of us. And I'm sure that it's possible, but it takes a moral direction and moral leadership, which we have not had.
No other person who had this question is a strategist at heart, because in the 2018 election, Josh Welly lost by 35,000 votes, and 10,000 of them were in Lakewood. And the answer to how we change that is complicated. It starts with making everybody else in Ocean County, in Manchester, and Jackson, in Bay Head, and Point Pleasant Beach, and Borough, and every other community there understand that even if their town isn't going blue like Hamilton, every single Democratic vote that we can run up in those communities, every single Democratic vote that we can run up here in the margins in Mercer and in Eastern Monmouth helps offset problems in Ocean County from a Democratic voting standpoint. I started meeting with folks in Lakewood back in May. Marta Harrison was the first person I sat down with when I decided I thought I might want to run in CD4. She is a former mayor down there. She's also Ocean County, vice chair of the Democratic Party. And she said, this is one of the toughest places to persuade, and you as a woman are going to have a harder job. But what it takes is consistently showing up from a policy standpoint, showing folks in Lakewood that I care about them and the things that are affecting their community before they ever give me anything in return. So I've been meeting with the Unity Commission there, because as a person of faith, I think that's a great way to go down, to meet through the Unity Commission, which is multicultural, multi-faith effort in Lakewood. And then also, I would just say that from a policy standpoint, I am the only candidate up here that has clearly and unequivocally said, I do not support BDS. I do not support boycott, divest, and sanction. That is not how we treat our Jewish allies or Israel. I have a strong foreign policy background and platform that values a two-state solution in the Middle East. And I know a lot about the issues, whether it's anti-Semitism or hate, the community is concerned about. And I've made clear my positions, and I think they will support me eventually because of it.
We're gonna do 2 more questions. We're allowed to stay a little longer
Everybody will
today.
be out here by 9 o'clock?
No, but I actually have a little bit more time today. I have a little bit more time, so we're good. When I kick everybody out, don't be offended. But we have it till a little bit after 9, so we're gonna take our last 2 questions. I'm gonna let everybody do a final statement and then finish off with announcements. So this is.
You did say though, and it's 9
No, I spoke with them. I got permission to extend it to 9:30.
Perfect.
All right?
Perfect.
I keep my cards. Right, close. All right, second to last question. $1 trillion deficits, even in good times, are not sustainable. And of course, Chris Smith has merely voted for every Republican tax cut and for Trump's big binge in military spending, especially on nuclear weapons. What are your views on rolling back defense spending, especially nukes and on taxes? This comes from Jeff Laurenti, who ran in 1986. Where are we at now?
Another great question. Yes, so having served in the U.S. Foreign Service, I've gotten to see up close and personal what you can do with very little from a budgetary standpoint versus what you can do with a lot. And as an illustration, there are more paid full-time members of military bands, so their full-time job is to play an instrument, than there are U.S. Foreign Service officers and diplomats serving around the world to protect you in our embassies. And that's part of the problem. And the generals and the Joint Chiefs will tell you that. They've been going up to Capitol Hill regularly for over a decade, begging for a realignment of our military defense spending, saying, do not give us this money. We don't need it. We don't want it. We have everything we need. Give it to the State Department, or we're going to be buying a lot of bullets 5 to 10 years down the road. And that is my fundamental philosophy here when it comes to defense spending. We also need to reinstitute a system of oversight of the military from a financial standpoint. There are cost overruns, there are cost plus contracts, there are no bid contracts. We need to make sure that that money is being spent wisely in our defense. If the money was actually going to the soldiers to give them a pay raise, I would be all for it. But instead, it's going to $10 million tanks that are used once and then embedded immobile in the sand in Iraq. So I don't support that. I also think it's a problem that we have two parties in Washington who are not being accountable to voters about the budget. Two parties that are going to spend, and not say how they're gonna pay for things. We can no longer run up our national debt. It is not fair to my generation and the generations below, and we need to have folks in Washington who are gonna be accountable from a spending standpoint. I will work tirelessly to repeal the state and local income tax deduction cap, which is killing our families throughout CD4. My own home value in Little Silver has gone down over 8% this year. We have to do better for our families, and it can't be through continued increased taxes.
Good.
I do want to say one thing about BDS, because I spoke earlier about, unfortunately things become black and white, but everything is really in a gray area. So I want to make an invitation for anyone whom that issue is very important to you. I would love to talk to you as we close here, potentially outside of the library. I'm also, as a citizen, looking for consistency, and this is one position where I get confused a little bit about my colleague Stephanie's position, because she says that she fights for human rights, and first and foremost that's what she's looking for, and yet she's not looking at the internationally recognized human rights abuses happening on the Palestinian people. So I do support dialogue and a conversation, and I support other complementary measures that can prevent this from becoming an anti-Semitic type movement. But the whole thing is not anti-Semitic, and there are core parts of it that promote human rights. And even J Street themselves promotes dialogue about boycotting and divesting. The last thing I'll say there, through line and consistent with corporate responsibility, I support boycotting and divesting from corporations on occupied territory that is profiting off the conflict. So going back to defense spending, one of the best departments that came, one of the best ideas that came out of the presidential debates for me was the idea to have a Department of Peace. I think we need to proactively defund huge parts of the military and instead fund something like a Department of Peace that would be a sister to the military. And I think all of our foreign aid programs should be about creating sustainable local food systems so that these communities can be resilient and self-sustaining. I think it should be towards women's empowerment and economic empowerment programs, and I think it should be towards conflict resolution. Again, this is a place for mindfulness, which is about increasing empathy and building mental health is also applicable in foreign policy.
I'm really happy that we got to this question, because I think, and I'm afraid, that we as Democrats are maybe operating in a bubble. So much of our ability to win in November and change things is going to be how we talk about the economy, affordability, our taxes, what it's like to run small businesses, and the issues of money and, as I said, affordability. Minimum wage. I spoke today to a small business owner who has a fishery who said, I hire young people. I'm afraid of Democrats because you're going to raise minimum wage, and I hire a lot of young people as a first job, and I love doing that, and it's great, but I cannot afford to pay $15 an hour. And I hear over and over and over and over that the question of cost and affordability is at the core. And so I'm afraid that some of our great ideas and in our moral direction is rooted in our values, which is excellent, but we will lose because we can't talk to people who are saying, yeah, but my 401k went up 30%. So I don't care what you're saying, that matters to me. So I think when we talk about, defense spending, we're not going to dismantle. We can create greater transparency and create greater dialogue, but until we stimulate the local economy, we figure out how to bring with the circular economy, the green economy, and we find ways to supplement and support family businesses, small businesses, and new industry, and bring with international, with intellectual property values and other kinds of intangible assets and other ways of generating new funds for our towns, we will not really break through and convince enough people to vote for us. Thank you.
And our last question before closing statements. If elected, how do you plan to reach across the aisle and encourage bipartisan initiatives?
Great. So this is another place where I think the skill of coaching, being a professional coach, is why I feel that I'm best placed to serve at a moment in time where we are as polarized as we've ever been. And so those skills include the ability to sit and listen with someone that disagrees with me and to get really genuinely curious, non-judgmentally. These are the practices that I'm trained in and that I coach other people to bring into their own professional and personal lives. And so for me, this job is about building relationships. And it's about listening not only to constituents and then going and relaying what's best for this district and building as many relationships locally here, not just for the purposes of campaigning, but so that my thinking and my proposals are always completely aligned with what's happening in CD4, but also the art of conversation, the art of dialogue that David keeps talking about. I believe I'm the only person on this stage that is actually trained in those skills, in those softer skills that in many places we don't really think about as being really important. But at the end of the day, that's why I think I'm best placed to actually get things done while not giving up my values and giving up more of a progressive agenda, which is actually what's ethically right and needed right now for the majority of Americans and the majority of families.
Crossing the aisle. First of all, I think we have to dismantle the aisle. The concept of the aisle is wrong. We need to talk. We need to talk differently. We need to find the economic and the social meeting point, and we can. I just co-authored a book called A Higher Calling with a former congressman whose entire career was based on that. We need to do that in our communities. We need to stop judging. When I sat on the NJ Transit back to Red Bank the other day with a woman who was single mom, 2 high school kids. We started talking. She said she was Catholic, voted Republican. I said, you probably voted for Christmas. She said, yeah, I probably did, over and over, until we actually had a conversation. And she said, oh, those are some good ideas. Oh, I haven't really had any real options, no other real choices. Oh, you have some ways of bringing down the cost of higher education for us in our district? Oh, and we kept on going like that. By the end, in 45 minutes, we were friends. She was a Republican Catholic who voted for Smith over and over, and she said, I'm gonna vote for you. I thought that it comes down to conversations, common goals, and economic and moral advantages. Until we give people reasons to change, it's obvious. There's no reason to change. So we have to come up with those reasons, tangible ones, ones that have more social impact, and ones that help people advance their personal goals for their lives and their families and their communities.
David, I promise I won't bite you if you hand the microphone directly over to me. So, look, I think this starts with this election, and it's what I've been doing, because the reality is that to win NJ4, we need 70% Democratic voter turnout and support for the candidate, and we need 70% of something else. And it's not a secret that that something else is probably not Democrat, right? It's independent, unaffiliated voters who outnumber Democrats and Republicans in this district 2-1. It's moderate voters who have voted Republican in the past, but who are concerned about the state of discourse in our country. I talk a lot about who my target voter is here. I think she's a woman over age 30, all the way up, who's raising her kids and afraid to send them to school, afraid of gun violence. She is concerned about turning on the television and having her children hear what's being said in Washington, D.C. She is frustrated about rule by Twitter and wants folks who actually care about working on early childhood education, paid family leave, and lowering her family's tax bill and improving health care. And she's also not a dues-paying member of Planned Parenthood, a protester, but she is somebody who is terrified that when the Supreme Court hears this case in March, her daughters may actually grow up in a world where they have less rights than their mother did to access fundamental health care and have control over their own bodies. And I believe I am the best candidate to make this argument and go into rooms that are not Democratic clubs, because I've spent my entire life as a diplomat and as a nonprofit professional going into communities that I shared nothing in common with, not even a language, and having conversations and relating to folks on a human level. Reasonable people can disagree about abortion rights. I say that all the time. One of the reasons why I am so fundamentally pro-choice is that means that my values are not being put on somebody else in a medical room. And the only person that doesn't belong in that room is the federal government. I think we can make this case and win.
Thank you, the three of you, for being here today, and I would like to give everybody an opportunity to do a closing statement. We're going to start with Stephanie for 2 minutes, then David and Christy.
Tell people are getting restless. So first off, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to us. This is what democracy is all about. It is an honor and privilege to stand up here and talk to you. The next time I come, I would really like this to be much more of a two-way street, because I fundamentally believe that the basic job of a representative is to listen to their constituents. It is not my job to go to Washington, D.C. and advocate in a vacuum. It is my job to be here every month, every week, listening to your concerns and bringing them to Washington and amplifying your voices. And that's one of the fundamental things that's been missing in this district for so long. We've had the same representative for 39 years who has not deigned to hold a town hall in over 27 years. We have somebody who owns a home and lives in Virginia and does not come back when he is given the time off from the job that we pay him to do, to come here and talk to us, and that's wrong. So I have committed to holding 39 town halls in my first term alone, if I'm lucky enough to be your congresswoman. And I will come here every month and listen to your concerns. And I hope that the people who don't agree with me show up as often as the people who do, because there are real differences of opinion in this room, and we all need to be pushed. And the role of a representative at base is to listen to folks and elevate their concerns and be a champion and a fighter for them, and that's what I want to do. I hope if you've liked what you've heard tonight, you've seen my passion and my experience, understand that I am ready to hit the ground running on day one. I have those relationships here. I have them in Washington. I've written the legislation. I'll write lots more on our behalf. That you will give me the honor of your support, your vote at the county convention on March 4th, your vote in the primary, your vote in November. If you'd like to volunteer, my staff, Kim and Kristen, are in the back. That's half my team here tonight. We'd love to welcome you to Team Stephanie, and my website is stephaniefornewjersey.com. Thank you so much.
Let's not make this campaign and this election about Chris Smith. And the reason why is that as long as we keep defining ourselves by the guy we want to replace, we're going to take our eye off the ball. And the real question is everything that we have yet to do. The new ideas, the innovation, helping local businesses, coming up with financial solutions, bringing in the right kind of investments. I have one company, international health company, that is already talking to and ready to come and invest and buy a local health lab to transform that into next generation health solutions. I have the business acumen, I have international relations, I have the ability to talk to those folks down in Lakewood and those folks up in Rumson about a way to move forward that enhances our communities, our lives, our budgets. The three things that I elaborated on briefly were the cost of healthcare, because it's something that is so pressing. Every single family in this district and almost across the entire country is touched by the catastrophe of a broken healthcare system. Education has to be elevated. I want this district, our district, to become a knowledge capital. We can bring international talent here to talk and share values and share information. And of course, the environment. The environment and climate is an opportunity for us. So we should not be afraid of it. We should actually embrace it. And lastly, accessibility to participatory democracy. That's great to do more town halls, but we need to do other things. I'm working on an app that gives everybody information in real time. I'm working on time and expanding the hours and the accessibility of your congressperson across the district, and that's what I want to do for you. I want to serve, I want to listen, I want to recall your ideas and make them work for all of us. Thank you.
So if there's one thing you walk away with, I hope it's that Christine Conforti for corporate responsibility and sustainability. So I said at the beginning that this is not a right versus left, red versus blue reality we live in. It's really a top versus bottom. So I want to speak a little bit to the system that enables it. And it is a corporate powered system that buys our politicians. Period. End of story. We could look at every policy that we've talked about tonight that doesn't make sense through a lens of human rights, through a lens of actually living our democratic values. And why does it exist the way that it does? Because there are special corporate interests that are lobbying and are financing candidates to vote in a different way. So I want to end with a few thoughts on that system. I think it is incumbent on us to reverse money in politics as candidates as much as in legislation. So rather than waiting for transformational campaign finance reform, which is absolutely necessary, I think we need to start asking questions about where are we getting the money that fund our local campaigns now. And I think total participation, like David just said, includes running candidates that are actually from where we live. Representation, this job is about representing you. It's not just about listening. And this is where social accountability for me comes from social relationships. I can't go in there and do something that's wrong with Hamilton. You're gonna go tell my grandmother. Or Sumner Rippick's gonna go down and talk about me to their colleagues at Leonardo Jewelers there. Or my friends and family from Homedale High School are gonna know. I have a deep, authentic connection to many different towns through family members in this community. And so rather than my colleague Stephanie's campaign, who has 85% of donations, more than $1,000, coming from out of state, our campaign is setting a goal to have 80% of all donations come from within New Jersey. And the way that we're doing that in the first quarter for 2020, our goal is to have 4,000 people donate $40. It's authentically grassroots, it's simple, it's doable, and instead of spending time calling people out of state, I'm spending time talking and making relationships for people, for their vote, their support, and their money all at the same time. We can be so much more empowered than we are right now as a Democratic Party, and that truly grassroots way is the way to do it. Thank you so much for your time. All right, so let's just give them another round of applause. Thank you.